For transparent reasons, the fact that the Kielburgers felt they didn't need to register with the lobbying commissioner, I think has caused them a great deal of difficulty, and it's certainly hurt the government. So there's a question in terms of relations that's important. In terms of family, I'd like to put a few things on the table. One is that we were initially led to believe that the Prime Minister's family were paid because of Margaret Trudeau is an amazing public figure, and I could certainly see why she has a strong career. But what we found out yesterday that was really shocking was that the board at We were told that nobody was paid, and yet the Trudeaus were paid. And when the Kielburger brothers were pressed on that, they said that they weren't paid for their speaking fees, they were paid for the after events. So it was the corporate involvement that becomes very problematic for the Prime Minister, and I think that that's something that the Ethics Commissioner will follow up on, because, and this is nothing whether the Prime Minister was aware of it or not, it creates the image of trying to use the Prime Minister's family and name to get access or to give access to corporate interests. I think is highly problematic and very, so it raises the judgment certainly on the We organization. I appreciate my Liberal colleagues mentioning all their families, the Irish Catholics. God Almighty, I hope your family doesn't party with my family. It would go on for weeks, I bet. And I understand people saying that they don't want to use families, and yet yesterday the Liberals research shop came up that my daughter had been involved in with the Kielburger brothers, and they mentioned it in the national hearing. So I think I should put on the record how this is played out. The fact that my daughter, when she was in grade 7, raised money for Nicaragua before I was a member of Parliament does not in any way mean I am going to support this $900 million deal or oppose it. It's completely irrelevant, but the Liberals did mention it. And that's not the first time my children were named. I came across, and I'm just putting it on the record, my daughter, who was in grade 5, gave a speech about the children in Attawapiskat at the little St. Pat's grade school in Cobalt, Ontario. And I found that in a briefing note to Minister Chuck Strahl by the Department of Indian Affairs, that my daughter, who was in grade 5, was giving a speech on the conditions of children in Attawapiskat. And her name was listed, and I'm only mentioning her as well because it's her birthday today, and I would really like to see her. But family do get drawn in whether it's right or wrong. So I put that on the table. I have a problem with this motion for a couple of reasons. One is that what we do here is we create precedent. This is like law. And I have been on both sides. Well, I've been on opposition all my time, but I've been under Liberals and Conservatives. And we have to decide when we make a precedent here how it could be used in the future. So we have to be careful. Fishing expeditions, I believe, are beyond the purview of a committee. We have to have reason, specific reason, to ask for specific things because we have enormous powers here. We're not a court. There's no, if we vote on this and decide to go ahead, we have powers that are unique to our committee as parliamentarians. So there needs to be a judiciousness about them. To have such a wide cast in terms of cabinet that draws in family certainly raises questions to me. I don't think that that's in order. And we do also have a tradition in Parliament, which I sometimes have questioned, but taking the honourable member at their word, that is the Westminster tradition. We have to have a reason in order to investigate someone. We can't just say, prove to me that you're innocent, and then I'll believe that you're innocent. We actually have to have a reason because our parliamentary tradition is based on that principle. And as far as conflicts go, we have to provide those conflicts to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, which is outside the purview of this committee. So I think I understand what my colleagues attempting to get here, but I do think if we set this precedent, this will be used again for other purposes that may be even more nefarious, and we have to be careful of the tools that we have. So I cannot support this at this time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, calling the meeting to order. At the last day, we had Mr. Curick's motion up for discussion. I have the speakers list from last day. I'll go to Mr. Curick. Mr. Fergus is next after him. Mr. Curick.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was just asking to continue the debate. I'm not sure. I apologize for my ignorance, being a new member. But in terms of moving to proceed with the motion that we had adjourned debating, are we continuing on that?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Curick, you are welcome to speak to
Sure.
the motion that is on the table currently.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I appreciate this opportunity to once again enter into debate in what is an incredibly important subject, and certainly captured much of the attention of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And the motion that is at hand is very, very simple. It simply asks that we have full disclosure of the relationship between other members of Cabinet and the We Charity and the decision-making process. Each day, it seems, there is further information revealed about this ongoing scandal. And of course, many of us, I'm sure, were watching the testimony yesterday at one of at the Finance Committee, as I'm sure we will be all in rapt attention tomorrow. But the continuing revelations of connections, of lack of consistency in testimony, of the information that seems to be uncovered on a daily basis, I think speaks for itself when it comes to why a motion like the one that I presented last week is so important. It ensures that the very basic questions that Canadians are asking simply get answered. And that's what connections exist between members of Cabinet and the We Charity, and whether or not members of Cabinet knew about the conflict of interest that has become increasingly clear, and even just the ambiguity that exists between what these relationships look like. We had yesterday the Kielburgers mentioned that they had limited contact with members of Cabinet, that they wouldn't have called themselves friends of the Prime Minister. Well, we've heard all of these things before in the first Trudeau report, which found the Prime Minister guilty of ethics violations regarding to his friend, and I say that in quotes, friend the Aga Khan. So I think that Canadians deserve answers. This is a simple process, simple procedure that simply asks those that were tasked with making a decision regarding close to $1 billion. It simply asks for the information to be given to Canadians, the answers to be given to Canadians, and quite frankly, the answers that all Canadians deserve. So I look forward to what I hope is a productive debate on the issue. Look forward to being able to hopefully seeing this pass. And I would encourage all members of this committee from every party that we would be able to be productive and proactive to ensure that we have that attitude in mind to move this conversation forward, get the answers that Canadians deserve, and hopefully be able to move forward. And I would certainly ask that each member consider supporting this motion as it attempts to do that very thing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Shanahan. I'm so sorry. Mr. Fergus.
Eh bien, merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm not sure if this point was raised, but if from time to time you could read the speakers list to us, then it's a nice way to make sure that everyone knows where they are on the list of people who would like to speak to this debate. It's just a friendly suggestion. I listened to my honourable friends and colleagues' comments. Mr. Curick, And I read his motion attentively as well. Madam Chair, I hope that it's a bit unusual, but I hope that you'll agree with me. My honourable colleague says that his motion is quite simple. Unfortunately, it's not so simple. My colleague, Mr. Gerritsen, when we last met on last Friday, demonstrated quite simply that this is not a simple motion. He used his own example, in which he had several cousins and brothers and sisters, and all of those people would be asked to provide our committee with documents because in reading the motion, in the third paragraph, it says, additionally, the letter should require that all members of cabinet disclose whether they, their families, or their relatives have connections with We, Me to We Corporation, and so forth. Madam Chair, who are the families or relatives that were me, my children, my parents? Does that include my brothers and sisters? Does that include my cousins? Does that include close friends? My wife's family, my children's relatives, my grandchildren, my parents, and so forth. I mean, where does it end? Frankly, this is not a simple undertaking. That's the least one can say with respect to this motion. And if I did have a question to ask, Madam Chair, because I can see that my colleague would like me to conclude my comments, I do have a question to ask him through you, the Chair.
A question. Does my honourable colleague view this motion that it has an effect of seeking to produce documents from my family members, from my relatives, as large as that could be, to produce these documents, from the interested parties that he's trying to seek here, in an effort to really get an understanding of as to who's involved, who's been involved with this organization, and if so, under what form should they produce these documents? So that's a question which I would have for my colleague. I'd hope in his opportunity to speak when he's further down the speaking list to respond to that question. That would be very helpful to me, not in terms of my consideration as to whether or not to support this motion. But Madam Speaker, it just bears witness is that, again, it sounds simple, but it gets really complicated. And, again, and I sound a little bit like a broken record, and I'm trying to keep everything innovative here, and I'm not trying to wear down the clock, but I really have to ask all our honorable colleagues around the table, do we want, when I take a look at this motion, like the other motions that was passed last week, do we really want a situation where members of Parliament are investigating other members of Parliament? I really do believe this is something that we should let the Ethics Commissioner do. We can encourage the Ethics Commissioner. We can call the Ethics Commissioner here.
We could invite the Commissioner here, ask questions of the Commissioner, ask the scope and extent of of her investigation, encourage her to follow certain types of investigation, certain avenues of investigation, perhaps ask her to go further. Than the Commissioner was even planning on going. However, and we can make many suggestions to the Commissioner, but really that is the Commissioner's job. And if the Commissioner finds it pertinent and relevant to go further, then the Commissioner will do so. But if we're now saying that we're seeking all of this information, not only from the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's family, Katie Telford, Seamus O'Regan, and now all Cabinet members, as well as their families and relatives, then why not ask all MPs for this information? Why not ask everyone across this whole country? Where does it end? This is what concerns me. I hope my comments will make you think about whether we could adopt a motion that's not so broad and vague as this one. If we wish to adopt this motion, and I always say the best decision is not making a decision, or let me clarify those comments rather, not making this decision, and that we allow the Commissioner to decide upon the scope of her investigation, that the Commissioner be invited as a witness before our committee, that we encourage the Commissioner to pursue certain avenues of investigation. But if we decide to go forward in this manner, where does it end and when? Madam Chair, unfortunately, these questions have remained unanswered, or at least the responses have not been satisfactory. And we know that if we're going to go down this road, we can do so with many other subjects. We could launch investigations on just about anything, because we're simply seeking a partisan advantage. If that's not the goal here, and it shouldn't be the goal of this committee, it does not fall under our mandate and our responsibilities. I fear that if we start with this, it'll never end. However, before I close, I do salute the decision that we made last week within the framework of a bad decision, that we'll do the best we can with the decision that was made. But we did decide to limit this and make explicit what it is you're saying in camera. And so we can minimize the possibility that this fishing expedition underway will not damage people who have practically nothing to do with politics. They just happen to be members of a family or relatives of certain people, because, as I said, when you read this motion, it's very broad. Its scope is huge. So I will end on that, Madam Chair. And I sincerely hope that my colleagues will consider my comments today. Thank you.
next on the speaking list, we have Ms. Shanahan, followed by Ms. Briere, Mr. Angus, Mr. Keurig, and Mr. Drouin. Starting with Ms. Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And I, too, must express my dismay at the motion in front of us. I see that it has been some additional text was written following an earlier motion that was presented and retracted, and the additional text having to do with pursuant to the Standing Order 108-3H7 and to the committee's current study to review, and I stress that word, review, the safeguards which are in place to avoid and prevent conflicts of interest, and there might be a grammatical error there, and federal government procurement, contracting, grant contribution, and other expenditures. So this is a study that this committee has agreed to undertake, but this motion goes on to add to that motion with instructions that I'm wondering are even in order. And I think that the problems are, let's look at the fact that we're asking the chair to write a letter to each member of cabinet to disclose whether they had knowledge of the personal relationships between those listed and we, and there's a whole list of the we organizations. We're not talking about, there's no framework here. Later on, we're talking about that this be prior to the Cabinet's decision to award the administration of the Canada Student Services Grant. What does that timeline look like? What are the dates that we're talking about? What are, how is someone receiving this letter? Where are they to start? What are they to make of this request? And as my colleague pointed out, later on, when we ask about their families or their relatives, whether they have connections, again, what are we talking about there? So who is your family? And I don't know if we'll have the opportunity to hear from every member here as to who their family members are, but I myself have a couple of exes and a number of children. I shall not name them here for their own privacy. In my family, 8 brothers and sisters. Again, hard for me to keep track even of who the spouses are and partners and the number of nieces and nephews that I have. It's a moving target. It is indeed. Families are fluid today. Families are flexible, and we love every one of them, but they didn't sign up for this kind of disclosure. Who are the relatives? Even going out farther in the family line. And I can tell you, coming from a good Irish Catholic family, yes, I have over 65, again, lost track of the cousins there, the first cousins. And they're all doing well, though, I'm happy to say. Thank goodness for Facebook. But it is, it's very concerning that this is the kind of net that this committee wishes to throw out there. I don't think the Canadians listening to us would agree that that's entirely appropriate for this committee to be doing. So that is, I have many concerns about this resolution, and not the least is that I don't see how it's helpful to the work of this committee in that we want to review the safeguards which are in place to avoid and prevent conflicts of interest. I believe what is wanted to be said there in the federal government procurement, contracting, grant contribution, and other expenditures. And I think that's what Canadians want to understand, is that this committee is executing its responsibility to make sure that the ethics commissioner, the lobbying commissioner, the different independent, nonpartisan commissioners that we have in place who have full powers to compel any document, to question any person that they deem necessary to be able to say that they can undertake their job. So I think that that's, again, I'm very concerned about this motion, and I hope that the other members of this committee will reconsider it. Thank you.
Madame la Présidente, je vais continuer dans le même sens que mes collègues. Maman a une famille de...
Madam Chair, I'll keep going in the same vein. I have a lot of family members. Many of my brothers and sisters have 3 or 4 children. I would cross them on the road and I wouldn't be able to recognize them. I even have family in the Dominican Republic.
Je me pose...
So this is what I'm wondering as well. How the opposition parties will define families, relatives in this context? And why are they casting such a wide net for information that may be confidential or personal? Also, along the same lines, it says,
Est-ce qu'on parle de...
what does prior to mean? Are we talking about the day before the decision, the week before, the month, 2 months? There's no indication of a timeline. So I think that merits debate as well. Furthermore, as my colleague Brenda was saying, it's hard to keep track of everyone in one's extended family, especially if you have a large family. It's a work in progress. There are regular changes made to families these days. So could we add the phrase "to the best of our knowledge" or "to the best of my knowledge"? Because this is, once again, quite a broad undertaking. And it's difficult to circumscribe the effort. So that's a request I have for the opposition.